2, 8, and 9. If indeed you really fulfill the royal law in accordance with Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. You do well. Now, we see when Jesus is asked by, I don't remember if it's the Pharisees, the scribes, or the Sadducees, but he's asked which is the greatest of the law. It was, and he tells them that you love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and then likewise you love your neighbor as yourself. So this is what that's referencing, and this was given to Moses, and we see it in Leviticus 19:18, how you love your neighbor. And ideally, this is, and I think it's in Luke that he's telling this, and then the guy questions, well, who is my neighbor? And then we see Jesus giving the parable of the Good Samaritan to show that anybody you come in contact with is your neighbor. So with that being said, anybody who comes across our path, we're to show love to. King James uses the term charity because it's an action. Love nowadays just becomes, it's really been watered down by movies and society to just pretty much where it's a word of emotion and that's it. But for some, but ideally, biblical love requires action. It requires if you see them needing something, you try your best, and if you can provide it, you give that to them. So it's not just an emotion, but a reaction to things. So what he's saying is, you're seeing these poor people here who need, yet nothing's being done. How can you say you love Christ when you're neglecting those who have needs? The fact that they're favoring the rich people, they were probably shunning the poor people, which meant that the poor people probably had needs they stood in, that had to be met, that they could have met, the rich people could have helped meet. But the church itself was focusing so much on the rich people that the needs weren't being seen. And if they were loving their neighbor as they were supposed to, they would have treated them equally and saw the needs and been able to meet what they could for those that were poor in their congregation. And if we have everybody look at them as the same, showing no prejudice, we may miss some stuff. We may not pick up on everybody, what they're dealing with, but if we'll notice things. We'll notice, okay, this person looks like they're struggling. They're acting a little different. And we'll have concern to say, well, is everything okay? And we'll notice sometimes and know that those we come in contact with may have suffered some type of loss, whether it be a job or a family or something, if we show this love. Also, sometimes if we show this love to people, they have that to where they come to us because they know we care. And that's ultimately another way of us ministering as Christians. We're there for people to come to because we show our love. If we're neglecting love towards certain neighbors, those we come across in church, then why are they going to even bother talking to us when they might need somebody to talk to? They wouldn't. I mean, they're in a bad spot if they need somebody to talk to oftentimes. They need somebody to advise. They need maybe help, but if somebody's not showing that love to them, of course they're going to be like, well, there ain't even no point bothering talking to them because it's just not going to help any. So sometimes people bottle things up and keep things to themselves and let needs go unmet because they don't see love of other people. So as Christians, by doing this shows Christ, ultimately. Because we see in the New Testament, Christ met needs and then brought the Word oftentimes. He healed, then brought the Word. We as Christians aren't to neglect a need and just bring the Word. If we see a need, we should try to show love by helping meet that. And sometimes that's just being a listening ear to somebody. Verse 9. But if you show prejudice and favoritism for people, you commit sin and rebuked and convicted by the law as violators and offenders. So this royal law he's quoting from Leviticus in the New Testament in the Gospels, if they're showing prejudice, then they're breaking this law. And of course, as Christians, we all know that we need God's grace. We're all falling short of God's law, and that's why Christ came. But what he's saying is, why are you willingly choosing to just break God's law by doing this? You know, having a willingness to sin is much different than just sinning. Seeking to sin is much different than just committing sin. These people are making it a point to show favoritism to these rich people, which meant it wasn't just a sin. It was still sin, but it was becoming more not just what they did one time, but more of a way they were choosing to practice the church there. Through this sin is the way this church was operating, through the sin of favoritism for the rich people. And ideally, we can go beyond this favoritism and say that if we're openly seeking certain sins, and then we need to pray to God that He take that away from us. Because oftentimes, we're all going to sin, but if we're planning, if we're making purpose to do a sin, then most time it's going to get in the way of God's will for us, because it's not just something we do, it's something we're doing. And sometimes, fighting the flesh is very hard. And of course, prejudice falls and favoritism falls into fighting the flesh just like any other sin. And it sometimes takes time to get through, and it's something fighting the flesh is something we have to build ourselves up to by trusting in God. To overcome fighting the flesh, what we do is rely on His Spirit, His Word. Because we're not going to be strong enough on our own to fight this flesh. So in this church here that James is talking to, he's realizing you ain't going to be strong enough on your own to overcome this prejudice. And some of the people in the church may have thought, because of the way the church was ran, that prejudice was okay. That showing favoritism for the rich was just how things were to be done. And oftentimes the way we react with younger Christians, those newer to the faith, those who may not know as much in the Word, the way we act, sometimes they may think, well, that's okay because they're doing it. So we got to remember we're examples as well. So, while we should strive to live for God for ourselves, we got to also realize that our following God will affect others. And this was causing the poor to stumble, and poor to feel left out. And when we choose sin over Christ, it's going to cause somebody to stumble. Of course, for us to choose it, we're already following ourselves, but it's going to possibly cause others to stumble in the same area because of us. And if we're looking to God and we're looking to love, we're going to consider that. And that's what James is telling them.